The night of my son's promotion party was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life. The room was filled with laughter, glasses clinking, and people congratulating him for the success he had worked so hard to achieve. I sat quietly at the corner of the table, smiling as I watched him beam with pride. For a brief moment, I almost forgot the tension that had been building between me and his wife. Then she leaned in close, her lips barely moving, and whispered words that froze my blood. "You will not live to enjoy a dime of it." At first, I thought I had misheard her, but her smirk told me I had not. My chest tightened as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Imagine sitting in a room full of family and friends, yet hearing something so venomous only you were meant to hear. What would you do if someone whispered those words to you at a family party? Tell me in the comments, because I know people will have very different answers. She believed her secret cruelty was safe, hidden in the noise of the celebration. What she did not know was that the camera in the corner, the one set up to record the speeches, was still running. Every word was captured, every sly glance was preserved, and one day, those words would come back to destroy her. Before I tell you how that moment unraveled everything, let me ask you, if you were in my place, would you stay quiet and keep her secret for the sake of peace, or would you confront her immediately? Comment what you would have done, because my choice shaped the rest of this story. In the days after the party, her words echoed in my head like a curse. I kept asking myself how things had come to this point. She was not always so openly cruel. When my son first brought her home years ago, I wanted to welcome her with an open heart. I had raised him to be kind, respectful, and hardworking. I thought if he loved her, then she must have good qualities too. At first, she played the role of the sweet and caring partner. She smiled at me, helped in the kitchen during holidays, and always said the right words. My friends would tell me how lucky I was to have such a polite daughter-in-law. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to think our family had grown stronger with her in it. But soon, the cracks began to show. I remember the first time she made a remark that stung. We were at Sunday dinner. I had cooked his favorite roast, something I always did when he visited. She looked at the table, then said with a half smile, "You really do not need to cook like this. He is not a little boy anymore." Her tone was light, but her eyes carried something sharper. My son laughed it off, not realizing how it landed. I swallowed my pride and said nothing, convincing myself it was just a careless comment. Over time, the careless comments grew into patterns. She started answering questions on his behalf, speaking over me when we were together, and making decisions as if I did not exist. If I suggested something about family gatherings, she would quickly dismiss it with, "That is not necessary," or "We will handle it differently now." It was subtle, but each remark chipped away at my place in the family. One day, she intercepted a letter from an old friend of mine. I found it later, unopened, in the trash. When I asked her about it, she shrugged and said it must have been a mistake with the mail. I knew better. She wanted to cut me off, to make me feel isolated, and slowly, she succeeded. Holidays became more about her side of the family. My son spent less time with me. I noticed how he changed when she was around, his shoulders tense, his words shorter, as if he was trying not to upset her. He still loved me, I knew that, but he was caught in her web. What hurt most was the way she treated my efforts as nothing. I once gave them a quilt I had been sewing for months. She accepted it with a tight smile. Then later I saw it stuffed into a closet, untouched. Little things like that made me realize she had no respect for me or for the years I had spent building a home for my son. Still, I tried to keep peace. I reminded myself that marriages are complicated, that young couples want their independence. I told myself to stay quiet, to let them live their lives. But in the back of my mind, a voice whispered, "She does not just want independence, she wants control." And control she got. She monitored every dollar he spent, scolded him if he gave me gifts, and even suggested I sell my house because it was too much for me. My home, the place where my husband and I built our memories, reduced to something she saw as a burden. If you were in my place, would you keep swallowing these small humiliations for the sake of peace? Or would you confront her and risk pushing your son away? Tell me in the comments. I wonder how many of you would choose silence, and how many would choose a fight. The cruelest part was that my son often did not see what was happening. She was careful. In public, she praised me just enough to appear respectful. She called me Mom in front of others, smiling sweetly, But when the doors closed, her words cut like knives. I began to doubt myself. Was I imagining it? Was I just an old woman too sensitive to change? But then came moments that could not be excused. Like the Christmas when she replaced my handmade ornaments with glossy store-bought ones, laughing that mine looked outdated. Or the Easter when she banned me from bringing food, saying, "We do not need old recipes at the table." Each time, my heart sank a little lower. My friends noticed too. One even pulled me aside after a gathering and whispered, "She does not treat you right." It was the first time someone else confirmed what I felt. I was not crazy. I was not imagining the contempt. By the time of the promotion party, I had learned to brace myself whenever we were in the same room. She had a way of making me feel invisible, even when I was surrounded by people. And yet, nothing prepared me for the venom of her whisper that night. Her past actions had been cruel, yes, but this was different. This was a threat, a declaration that she wanted me gone, not just from their lives, but from this world. When she leaned in and said, "You will not live to enjoy a dime of it," all the little humiliations I had endured over the years suddenly aligned into one chilling truth. She wanted everything for herself, and she saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. I walked away from that party, knowing I could no longer pretend. Something inside me shifted. The old woman who stayed quiet for peace was gone. She had gone too far. But what I did not know then was that the very words meant to intimidate me would become her undoing. The week leading up to the promotion party was a blur of activity. My daughter-in-law had taken charge of everything, from the invitations to the decorations. She loved being in control, and she loved being seen as the perfect hostess even more. My son went along with it, too busy with his new responsibilities at work to notice the sharp edges behind her smile. The house was decorated with balloons, banners, and flowers, all arranged to show off their success. Guests arrived in suits and cocktail dresses, carrying bottles of wine and congratulatory cards. The living room was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of clinking glasses. I stood by quietly, watching from the sidelines, trying to feel happy for my son. After all, he had worked so hard to get where he was. But even in moments of celebration, she found ways to make me feel small. When guests came over to greet me, she hovered nearby, cutting in with quick remarks that turned attention back to herself. A cousin asked me how I was doing, and before I could answer, she said with a laugh, "She is fine. She always keeps herself busy with little things." The words stung, but the cousin only smiled politely and moved on. Later, as everyone gathered for a toast, she stood beside my son, her hand clutching his arm tightly. She raised her glass high and said, "To my brilliant husband, the man who makes everything possible for this family." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes flicked toward me for just a second. It was subtle, but I felt the message. He belonged to her now, and I was an outsider. I clapped and smiled, but inside, my heart ached. I wanted to stand up and remind her that I had been the one to raise him, to nurture him through sleepless nights, illnesses, and school projects. I had been there every step of the way. Yet in her world, my place no longer mattered. After the toast, the evening continued with small talk and laughter. She floated around the room, greeting guests, laughing at jokes, and showing off her expensive dress. Every so often, she made a comment that seemed harmless to others but landed like a blow to me. When one guest praised the food, she said, "Yes, catering is always better than old-fashioned cooking." When another complimented the decorations, she replied, "I could not have done it without my husband's bonus. It is good we have moved past the days of scraping by." It was like she wanted to erase every part of our past, every part of me, from the picture of their future. I sat in the corner, watching, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I told myself to stay calm, to not let her see the pain she caused. But the more I watched, the more I realized she was putting on a performance. She was not just celebrating my son's achievement, she was declaring her own victory. A few times, I caught her glancing at me, her lips curling into a faint smile that no one else noticed. It was the kind of smile that said she knew she had the upper hand. She thrived on my silence, on the way I bit back words that begged to come out. At one point, I stepped outside to get some air. The night sky was clear, stars scattered across the darkness. I breathed deeply, trying to steady myself. I reminded myself that this was my son's night, and I should not let her ruin it. He deserved his moment. He deserved to feel celebrated. But even as I thought it, I could not shake the dread that clung to me. When I walked back in, the speeches had begun. A colleague of his praised his hard work, his dedication, and his leadership. My son beamed, his eyes shining with pride. I clapped along with everyone else, forcing myself to focus on his joy. Yet in the corner of my vision, I saw her leaning against the wall, her eyes scanning the room with satisfaction. Then it happened. In the middle of the applause, she leaned close to one of the women beside her and whispered something. They both glanced in my direction and laughed. I will never know what she said, but the sting of being ridiculed in my own son's moment burned deep. I clenched my hands tighter, my nails pressing into my palms, as if the pain could anchor me. By the time the evening began to wind down, I was exhausted, not from the party itself, but from the constant effort of keeping myself composed. I had spent hours pretending not to notice the subtle jabs, the whispered comments, the sharp smiles. I had spent hours holding back tears that threatened to fall. I told myself to make it through the night, just one more hour. But deep down, I sensed something worse was coming. It was in the way she looked at me when she thought no one else was watching. It was in the way she hovered near me as guests began to leave. As I sat there, pretending to sip from my glass, I could feel the weight of her presence. I could feel her waiting, planning her next move. My chest tightened with anticipation, not knowing what words she would choose, not knowing how much more I could take. And I was right. What she did next was unlike anything she had ever dared before. It was not just a cutting remark or a whispered insult meant to belittle me. It was something darker, something that revealed the true depth of her contempt. That moment was coming, though I did not yet know it. The night was far from over, and the cruelest words of all were waiting for me, just out of sight. The living room had grown quieter as most of the guests began to leave. Empty glasses stood on tables, and half-eaten slices of cake sat abandoned on plates. My son was outside saying goodbye to a group of colleagues, his laughter still echoing faintly through the door. Inside, only a handful of us remained. I was gathering my coat, relieved the night was nearly over, when she appeared at my side. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she leaned close. Her perfume was sharp, almost suffocating, and her smile looked sweet enough to fool anyone watching. But the words that slipped from her lips were nothing sweet at all. "You will not live to enjoy a dime of it." For a moment, I could not move. My breath caught in my throat, and my hands went cold. I had endured years of her jabs and humiliations, but this was different. This was not just an insult. This was a threat. A clear reminder that she saw me as nothing more than an obstacle standing between her and whatever she believed she deserved. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. She tilted her head slightly, her smirk widening, as if savoring my shock. Then she stepped away, smoothing her dress, and greeting another guest as if nothing had happened. I stood frozen in place. The chatter of the room faded into a dull hum. I looked around, desperate to see if anyone else had heard her, but no one had. Everyone was too busy with their goodbyes and their small talk. The cruelty of her words was meant for me alone. My son came back inside, cheerful and glowing, completely unaware of the dagger she had just planted in my chest. He wrapped an arm around her waist, and she leaned against him with practiced ease. No one would ever guess the poison she had whispered only minutes before. I forced a smile, told my son how proud I was, and made my excuses to leave. As I walked out into the cool night air, the sound of her voice echoed in my mind, sharp and unrelenting. "You will not live to enjoy a dime of it." Each syllable replayed like a cruel melody. The ride home was a blur. Streetlights flickered past the window, but I hardly saw them. All I could think about was how far she had gone, and how powerless I felt to stop her. For years I had chosen silence, believing it would protect my relationship with my son. But now, silence felt like surrender. I barely slept that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had imagined it, but I knew I had not. Her expression, her tone, the way she savored the moment, it was all too real. And yet, what could I do? If I told my son, she would deny it. She would twist the story, claim I was confused or bitter. He would believe her, not me. That had always been her strength. Morning came heavy, with no answers. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and tried to steady my thoughts. That was when my phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend who had attended the party. She had recorded some of the speeches on her phone and wanted to share them with me. I pressed play, expecting to hear the toast. And I did. My son's colleague's voice filled the room, followed by laughter and applause. But then, in the background, faint yet unmistakable, I heard it, her voice, clear as day. "You will not live to enjoy a dime of it." My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. The room seemed to tilt around me. I replayed the clip again and again, and each time, there it was, her words, captured forever. I realized then that she had not been careful. She had chosen her moment poorly. The camera that had been set up to film the speeches had not been turned off yet. The microphone had picked up more than she ever intended. Her arrogance had betrayed her. I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. For years she had silenced me, dismissed me, made me doubt myself. But now I had proof. Proof she could not twist or deny. Proof that revealed her true nature. Tears welled in my eyes, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of defeat. They were tears of relief. I was not crazy. I was not imagining things. She had crossed the line, and this time, the evidence was undeniable. Still, fear mixed with my relief. What would I do with this? If I showed my son, would he finally see her for who she was, or would he still defend her? If I stayed silent, I would carry the burden alone, but at least there would be no war. I held the phone tightly, my thoughts racing. I had a choice to make, a choice that could change everything. For the first time, the power was in my hands, not hers. As I looked at the video again, I whispered to myself, "This is not over, not anymore." The camera had caught her. The proof existed. And deep down, I knew this recording was going to change the course of my life and hers forever. I must have played that video a dozen times that morning, each replay hitting me like a wave. Every time I heard her voice, the memory of her smirk came back stronger. The shock slowly gave way to something else, a spark of courage. For years she had hidden behind her charm, twisting the truth and making me feel invisible. But now, the mask had slipped, and the evidence was in my hands. Still, I hesitated. What should I do with this recording? It was tempting to march straight to my son and demand he listen, to shove the phone into his hands until he could no longer deny what I had endured. But I knew her. She would not admit it. She would cry, twist her words, claim it was a joke taken out of context. She had always been skilled at turning things around, and I feared my son would fall for it again. So I waited. I thought carefully. I decided to keep the video to myself until the right moment came. Patience, I told myself, would give me strength. Over the next few days, I carried on as if nothing had changed. I visited the grocery store, tended to my garden, and made polite phone calls. But inside, I was different. For the first time in years, I did not feel powerless. I had a secret, one she did not know I held, and that knowledge steadied me. A week later, I was invited to dinner at their house. My son wanted to celebrate again, this time just the three of us. I almost declined, but something told me I needed to go. It would be my chance to observe, to see if she suspected anything. When I arrived, she greeted me with that same polished smile. "Mom, so glad you could come," she said, her voice sweet enough to rot teeth. My son beamed, pulling out a chair for me. Dinner began as usual, with small talk about work and the weather. She laughed easily, poured wine, and acted as though we were the perfect family. But I watched her closely. I noticed the way her eyes flickered toward me when my son was not looking. There was tension beneath her calm surface, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. At one point, she leaned across the table and said, "We should really talk about your living situation, Mom. That house is too big for you alone. Maybe it is time to think about selling." And to quote, my fork froze midway to my mouth. I set it down carefully, my hands steady even though my heart pounded. "I appreciate your concern," I said softly, "but that house is full of memories. I am not ready to give it up." Her smile tightened, but she said nothing more. My son quickly changed the subject, talking about his latest project at work. But I saw the flicker of frustration in her eyes. She was not used to me standing firm. That night, as I left their house, I realized something important. She believed she still had all the power. She thought her whisper at the party had disappeared into thin air. She had no idea that her own arrogance had betrayed her. The following weekend, I invited a close friend over for tea. I trusted her, and I needed someone else to hear the recording, to confirm that I was not imagining things. We sat at my kitchen table, steam rising from our cups, and I pressed play. My friend's eyes widened as the words filled the room. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "She really said that, clear as day." I nodded, my chest tightening. "You see now why I could not sleep." "This is serious," she said, shaking her head. "You cannot let this slide. Your son needs to know who he is married to." Her reaction gave me strength. It was no longer just my word against my daughter-in-law's behavior. It was the truth, captured and undeniable. For days, I debated how to show my son. Timing mattered. If I pushed too hard, he might retreat into denial. If I waited too long, she might find another way to tighten her grip. I prayed for clarity, and then clarity came. My son stopped by one evening after work, alone. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his eyes weary. We sat in the living room, and after a moment of small talk, he sighed heavily. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you ever feel like she, I don't know, pushes too much?" My heart leapt. It was the first time he had ever hinted at doubt. I leaned forward, my hands trembling slightly. "What do you mean, dear?" He rubbed his forehead. "She is always planning, always managing. Sometimes I feel like I cannot breathe, but maybe that is just how Marriage Island." I swallowed hard. This was my chance. Slowly, carefully, I pulled out my phone. "There is something you need to hear," I said, "something I've been keeping to myself." He looked at me with confusion as I pressed play. The room filled with the faint sounds of the party, the clinking of glasses, and then her voice. "You will not live to enjoy a dime of it." His head snapped up, eyes wide. "What was that?" I let the recording play again. He listened, his face growing pale. When it ended, silence filled the room. That cannot be right," he stammered. "She would never," but the evidence was right there, undeniable. His voice faltered, his shoulders sagged. I reached out, placing a hand over his. "I did not want to believe it either, but you needed to know." He sat back, running his hands through his hair. "Why would she say that to you?" "Because she sees me as an obstacle," I answered softly. "She wants control, and now you have proof of it." His eyes were full of turmoil. He loved her, but the truth was too loud to ignore. "If you were in my son's place, what would you do? Would you confront your spouse immediately, or would you try to explain it away? Comment your thoughts, because I wonder how many people would choose confrontation and how many would cling to denial." That night, he left my house with the recording saved on his phone. He did not say much as he walked out the door, but I saw the conflict in his face. He was torn between love and truth, between loyalty and betrayal. I knew the battle was only beginning. She would not give up easily. She would fight, deny, and manipulate, just as she always had. But this time, she was not fighting against my silence. She was fighting against her own words, captured forever. For the first time in years, I felt hope. Not because the struggle was over, but because I was no longer powerless. The tide had turned. The truth was on my side now, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not erase it. The days after I showed my son the recording were tense and uncertain. He did not call me right away, and I tried to give him space. I knew he needed time to process what he had heard. Still, every night, I lay awake, wondering what was happening inside his home. It did not take long for the storm to break. One afternoon, he came to see me, his face pale and tired. He sat down heavily on my couch and rubbed his hands together. "Mom, she knows," he said quietly. My heart skipped. "She knows what?" "She knows about the video," he whispered. "I do not know how, but she found out I had it. She is furious." I closed my eyes, a mixture of dread and determination coursing through me. "What did she say?" He shook his head. "She swore it was a joke. She said you misunderstood. She begged me to delete it. But Mom, I cannot ignore what I heard. It did not sound like a joke. It sounded like hate." I reached for his hand, because it was. "Do not let her twist the truth this time." Later that evening, I received a call. It was her voice on the line, sharp and cold. "You are trying to ruin my marriage," she snapped. "Delete that video or you will regret it." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "I did not put those words in your mouth. You did that all by yourself." She slammed the phone down, leaving me with a silence that felt heavier than any insult she had ever thrown before. For the first time, she sounded desperate. The next family dinner was unbearable. My son sat stiffly at the table, barely touching his food. She, on the other hand, was all smiles, laughing too loudly, pouring wine as if nothing was wrong. But beneath the performance, I saw the cracks. Her hands trembled slightly when she refilled her glass. Her laugh was just a little too sharp, a little too forced. At one point, she leaned across the table and hissed under her breath, "No one will believe you. You are just a bitter old woman looking for attention." I met her gaze, my voice steady. "The video believes me. And so does your husband." Her face paled, and she quickly glanced at my son, who was watching us closely. The mask she had worn so carefully was beginning to slip. The following week, the tension only grew worse. She tried to act as though everything was normal, but my son began pulling away. He spent more time at work, more evenings visiting me. Each time, he asked more questions. "Mom, did she ever treat you badly before this? Did she say other things?" I hesitated, not wanting to flood him all at once, but finally, I told him. I told him about the intercepted letters, the discarded quilt, the banned holiday dishes, the ornaments she had mocked. Each memory spilled out like water from a broken dam. His face grew darker with each story. "She made me believe you were exaggerating," he whispered. "She told me you were sensitive, that you made drama out of nothing, and I believed her." I touched his arm gently. "You wanted peace. You trusted your wife. That is not a sin, but now you see the truth." As the walls of denial crumbled around him, she grew frantic. She searched his phone, demanding he delete the video. She accused him of betraying her. She even tried to convince mutual friends that I was fabricating everything, but the evidence was unshakable. One evening, he arrived at my house with weary eyes. "Mom, we fought again," he said. "She tried to grab my phone. She screamed that I was choosing you over her. I do not know what to do." I looked at him, my heart aching for the boy I once held in my arms. "You have to decide who you believe. The truth is right in front of you." He dropped his head into his hands. "I feel like my life is tearing apart." I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. "Sometimes the truth does that, but it also sets you free." That night, I realized this was not just about me anymore. It was about him. He had been living under her control for years, blinded by love and loyalty. Now he was beginning to see the chains for what they were, and the fight that had once been mine alone was now his too. The battle lines were drawn, though no one had spoken them aloud. She was scrambling to protect herself, spinning lies and excuses, while I stood quietly with the truth in my hands. My son was caught in the middle, torn between the life he thought he knew and the reality unfolding before him. But I knew this much. The cracks were widening, and soon the whole facade would crumble. The breaking point came one Saturday evening. My son had asked me to come over for dinner again, and when I arrived, I could feel the tension before I even stepped through the door. His voice was calm but firm, hers was sharp and desperate. The argument had already begun. When I entered the living room, they both fell silent. My son's shoulders sagged with exhaustion, while her eyes burned with fury. She tried to cover it with a smile, but it faltered. "Mom," he said, "I want us to sit down together. We need to talk about what happened at the party." Her face drained of color. "There is nothing to talk about," she snapped. "That video is a misunderstanding." He looked at her, his jaw tight. "Then let us watch it together." She froze. For a moment, I thought she might bolt from the room, but instead, she forced a laugh, waving her hand. "That is ridiculous. It was just a joke. She is twisting everything." But my son was no longer wavering. He pulled out his phone and pressed play. The sound of clinking glasses filled the room, followed by her voice, clear and cold. "You will not live to enjoy a dime of it." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Her hands trembled, and for the first time, she could not hide behind excuses. That is not what I meant," she stammered. "I was joking. It was taken out of context." But the fear in her eyes betrayed her. She was not in control anymore, and she knew it. My son shook his head slowly. "You looked my mother in the eye and said that. How could you?" She lashed out then, her composure shattering. "Because she is always in the way. Everything has to include her. I am the wife. I should be the one who matters now, not her." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. My son's face hardened. He turned to me, pain etched across his features. "Mom, I am so sorry. I should have seen it sooner." I touched his hand gently. "You were blinded by love. We all make mistakes. What matters is what you do now." Her voice rose, shrill and panicked. "Do not listen to her. She is poisoning you against me. I gave up everything for you, and now you are taking her side?" But her desperation only dug her hole deeper. Every accusation, every frantic denial only proved what the video had already revealed. My son stood up, his expression resolute. "I cannot ignore this anymore. You treated my mother with cruelty and contempt, and you lied to me about it. This is not what marriage should be." She gasped as if struck. "You cannot mean that." He looked away, tears forming in his eyes. "I do not know what our future holds, but I know one thing. I will not let you destroy my relationship with my mother. That ends now." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. She sank back into her chair, pale and trembling. The fight was over, though no one had declared victory. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. For so long I had been silenced, dismissed, treated as if my voice did not matter. Now the truth had spoken for me, and it was louder than any denial. That night, my son walked me to the door. His voice was low and heavy. "Mom, I'm going to need time to figure this out, but I promise you this, I will never doubt you again." I squeezed his hand. "That is all I ever wanted, the truth." Ona. As I left their house, I glanced back through the window. She was still sitting in the chair, staring into space, her face a mask of shock and defeat. The woman who had whispered venom in my ear now sat crushed by her own words. I stepped into the night air, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, I felt free. The fight was not completely over, but the tide had turned. She could no longer hide behind lies or charm. The truth was out, and it had shattered the walls she built around my son. And deep inside, I knew the final chapter was yet to come. The days that followed were strangely quiet. After the confrontation, my son barely spoke to his wife. He went through the motions of daily life, but the bond between them had cracked wide open. I could sense the heaviness in his voice each time he called me. But there was also something else. A gentleness. A sincerity I had not heard in years. He visited me often, sometimes after work, sometimes on weekends. We sat in my kitchen with cups of tea, talking about ordinary things, as if he was rediscovering who he was away from her shadow. Each time, I wanted to tell him how much it meant to me just to have him back, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I cherished those quiet moments, knowing how fragile they were. As for her, she stayed away. She could not look me in the eye anymore, and when I did see her, her smile was brittle, her words clipped. She had lost control, and she knew it. The recording still existed, living proof of her cruelty, and that knowledge weighed on her more than anything I could ever say. One afternoon, my son sat across from me, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. He stared into the steam for a long time before speaking. "Mom, I do not know if my marriage can survive this, but I do know that I will not let anyone come between us again. I was blind for too long. I will never make that mistake again." Tears blurred my vision, but I smiled. "That is all I need, dear. I never wanted to take him away from you. I only wanted you to see the truth." In the weeks that followed, the changes became more visible. My son no longer rushed to defend her every word. He asked questions. He stood up for himself. Slowly, the power she once held began to slip through her fingers. She had built her throne on lies and manipulation, and the foundation had finally crumbled. One evening, I walked through my garden as the sun set, the air warm and golden. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. The roses my husband and I had planted years ago were blooming, their petals glowing in the fading light. I realized I was no longer living under the weight of her contempt. I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my place in my son's life. If you were in my shoes, would you have exposed the recording right away, or would you have waited for the right moment like I did? Tell me in the comments. I am curious how many of you would choose patience, and how many would demand immediate justice. The truth is, I did not have to destroy her. She destroyed herself. The moment she let her cruelty slip out in that whisper, she planted the seed of her own downfall. All I had to do was hold on to the truth and wait. And in the end, the truth was enough. Now, When I sit in my living room surrounded by the quiet hum of the house, I no longer feel invisible. I feel strong. I feel free. My life is mine again, and no amount of venom from her lips can take that away. Thank you for listening to my story. Do you think justice was served, or should I have done more? Comment your verdict, and if you enjoy hearing revenge stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Silent Sweet Revenge so you never miss the next one. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply letting the truth speak for itself.